Good morning and welcome. Habitat California and all of our Habitat affiliates statewide would like to welcome and thank you for joining us. We're so delighted that so many of our corporate and local business partners are able to connect with us today virtually. There are over 120 different organizations who are with us. And we're just so delighted to have you. You do so much in our communities in California, and we're really grateful that you're our partners, and we appreciate your commitment to affordable home ownership. I'm Debbie Arakel, Executive Director with Habitat for Humanity California, and I have the honor of getting to host today's program with our speakers and three incredibly talented panelists. On behalf of our statewide Habitat for Humanity network of affiliates, I'd like to start by recognizing our event sponsors. Our sponsors have jumped right into new territory with us to host an event that we've never done before. So thank you for taking that leap of faith with us. Our premier sponsor is Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and our event sponsor is Crambo Corporation. And I want to give them both a huge thank you. We also have three panel partners, and that includes Kaiser Permanente, Santa Ana Unified School District, and Salesforce.org. And we'd like to thank all of our generous partners for making today possible. And we welcome you again. Thank you for being here. I want to encourage all of you to say hello in the chat box. You can put in your organization, your name. We would love to see who you are and where you're joining us from. And we will be turning off the chat box during the program, but then we'll be turning it back on toward the end of the session if you have questions or comments that you want to share with us. We'll do our very best to follow up if we don't manage to cover something today. And we have been able to collect questions in advance for the panel, so we'll be focusing on those key themes. So as we dive right in this morning, we wanted to start by posing the question, what does habitat homeownership have to do with health, education, corporate social responsibility, and racial justice? A year or so ago, many of us might have struggled just a little bit with that question, but it's becoming clearer and clearer that housing and shelter and stability is absolutely essential. Without safe, decent housing, health and education is even less accessible and actually impossible for thousands of households in California. You all see it with your own workforce, and we do too. How many of you have employees who are trying to juggle everything at home, juggling their work, their jobs, and then also running a schoolhouse with their kids? This is partly what really inspired us to host a more in-depth conversation with all of our partners so we can talk about affordable housing for California's workforce. Habitat is in most communities throughout California, covering 44 counties. And you, our corporate partners, are right there with us. You're right there in pretty much every community as well. But there is so much hope and there is so much positivity because there's even more that hasn't changed. And we want to assure you that at Habitat, with your help, we are still providing safe, decent, affordable home ownership. We're breaking ground, we're closing on homes, and we're increasing home ownership up and down the state. All summer long, we've been starting new homes, and new homeowners have been buying and moving into their first-time homes. We're still repairing homes, especially with older adults and veterans on fixed incomes. In California, many of you probably realize that the homeownership rate is only at 55%. Not surprisingly, that is one of the very lowest in the entire nation. But what is shocking and totally unacceptable is that the homeownership gap across race and ethnicity in California is huge. 63% of white households own their home, while only 34% of Black and African American households own their homes. And it's only 43% of Latinx households who own their home. Habitat is still providing the first opportunity to earn equity and narrowing the homeownership gap for communities of color that have historically been excluded and denied access to homeownership. Habitat is still advocating for smart housing policy to increase supply, like accessory dwelling unit production, which are naturally affordable because they're smaller. It makes sense. We're still also building high density, multifamily, owner occupied condominiums. And all across California, we have a huge pipeline, and we are absolutely not slowing down. And after today, we hope that we'll all know even more about how affordable housing, including Habitat homeownership, supports stronger communities, workforce housing, and racial justice in California. It's so great to have all of you with us today. And at this time, I'd like to hand it over to Lori Filer, who is going to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. Lori is President and CEO of San Diego Habitat for Humanity of our Habitat California Legislative Committee.
When considering who we might invite as our keynote speaker this morning, there was really only one answer. Senate Pro Tem Toni Atkins has been a champion for housing, affordable housing, for a very long time. She understands how difficult it is for us to get permits in our own cities. We're especially honored to have Senator Atkins speak to us today because Habitat for Humanity California, and particularly San Diego Habitat, have a long history and committed partnership advocating and fighting for safe, affordable housing for all Californians. Senator Atkins is a relentless leader for affordable housing, and she led the most successful housing policy package in decades, ensuring SB 2, the Building Homes and Jobs Act, was passed into law in 2018, creating a permanent source of funding for affordable housing to assist thousands of families each year. With great pleasure, I'd like to welcome Senate Pro Tem Toni Atkins to kick us off this morning. Thank you, Toni.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and hello and welcome to you all. Habitat for Humanity is an organization that I have a profound respect for. Your leadership and efforts build access to affordable housing for so many individuals and families. With every set of blueprints and every swing of a hammer, you are providing stability, hope, and a piece of the American dream. Your support of our legislative efforts to improve California's supply of affordable housing helps deliver on those outcomes. Habitat for Humanity provided key support for my landmark affordable housing bill, SB 2, which created a permanent source of funding for affordable housing. And you've continued to advocate on behalf of housing legislation in recent years. That's critical to accomplishing our goals, and I hope our partnership in housing policy will continue into the future. As you know, decades of underproduction have had a direct impact on our housing supply in California, which has been further impacted by the loss of redevelopment and chronic federal disinvestment in housing. Then, COVID-19 hit, and it exacerbated the already critical need for more housing generally and more affordable housing in our state. That's why this past legislative session, the Senate committed to advancing a comprehensive approach to housing production that would have helped address California's years-long crisis. That package would have made more housing production possible and positioned California to leap forward exponentially as circumstances caused by the pandemic and economic downturn eased, while ensuring the recovery provides opportunity at all income levels. It included legislation to increase small-scale neighborhood infill, repurpose dead and dying commercial sites, ensure people could use existing CEQA streamlining or expediting tools, and create incentives for developers to include affordable housing. One of those bills, SB 1120, sought to increase housing production in a way that was manageable by allowing property owners to have duplexes and subdivide their property in single-family neighborhoods statewide, so long as existing or planned residences continued to meet community standards and protections. I was proud to have authored the bill because it would have added an opportunity for equity for property owners and a way to help pay the mortgage, and provided opportunity for home buyers to invest in something more moderately priced. It's disappointing that this bill, along with other housing legislation, was not ultimately successful, but the tools they provided will remain part of the discussion as we advance housing bills next year. I've been here before. It took a few years to get SB 2 enacted. Now, as then, the work continues, and my resolve is clear. We will advance housing bills in 2021. We must. overcrowding, unaffordable rents, homelessness. These were all symptoms of our housing crisis long before COVID-19. Habitat for Humanity certainly understands these needs deeply and has been a champion for individuals and families throughout our state and across the nation. From building new houses and rehabilitating homes so low-income families can attain home ownership, to working on policy efforts like the Cost of Change campaign, this organization is making a real difference in the lives of millions of people, and I thank you for your partnership and advocacy. In the coming months and years ahead, we need our business partners to help by contributing financially to projects via charitable work and by helping spread the word among other partners in the community about the importance of affordable housing, and to combat misinformation and the not in my backyard sentiments that can sometimes arise. My colleagues and I will continue to work on solutions that address California's housing crisis, and I appreciate knowing we have a trusted partner in Habitat for Humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Atkins. We value our partnership and joint achievements as well. And we're so encouraged that the conversation is turning more and more to home ownership. As you cited, we need more supply, period. California has been underproducing for decades, and we believe that increasing access to home ownership for all races and ethnicities will do more to combat the economic disparities than any other one single solution. I'm excited now to turn to our panelists to continue this discussion. I encourage you all to read their full bios because they're amazing, and we're so fortunate to have such thoughtful and experienced panel members with us today. I'd first like to welcome Dr. Bashara Shukair. Dr. Shukair is Senior Vice President and Chief Health Officer with Kaiser Permanente. Dr. Shukair oversees the organization's efforts focused on addressing social health of its 12.2 million members and 68 million people who live in the communities it serves. This work includes the creation of the nation's largest social health network integrated in Kaiser Permanente's healthcare services. And next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Susie Lopez Guerra, Director of Community Relations with Santa Ana Unified School District. Dr. Lopez Guerra collaborates with local businesses, community organizations, parent groups, and other departments and school sites to establish and sustain mutually beneficial partnerships. And I'd like to also welcome Sam Allen, Chief Operating Officer with Salesforce.org. Sam excels at aligning core business with strategic goals. He's experienced and adept at mergers and acquisitions, venture capital, and angel fundraising. Sam serves on the board of directors at Habitat for Humanity of he serves on the board of directors of Greater San Francisco, and he is also a U.S. Marine Corps veteran. Welcome. I'm so pleased to have all three of you with us today.
Thanks for having me, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie.
We certainly appreciate you being here. Thank you. So to start us off, we'd like to go ahead and jump in and maybe get a little bit personal. We have tremendous collective intelligence at this summit today, thanks to all of you. And each of you has a unique perspective based on your work, based on your sector, and your own personal experience. So to start off, we'd love to hear why stable housing in California is core to you and your values. And I think we'd like to start with Dr. Shukair, and then we'll hear from you, Sam Allen, followed by Dr. Susie Lopez Guerra.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. It's great being with everybody here this morning. So I'm Bashara Shukair. I'm a family physician by training. I trained in a residency program that was embedded within a healthcare for the homeless program. And very early on in my career, I got to appreciate the connection between housing and health. And I remember one of my very first patients that I was talking to at one of the homeless shelters. He was about 50 years old, and I just finished medical school, and I was so committed to delivering the best healthcare possible. And at the age of 50, I was really convinced that I needed to talk to this patient about getting a colonoscopy for screening for colon cancer. And I talked to this gentleman for a while, and then he looked at me after a few minutes and he's like, dude, what is it you don't get? This is my first night being homeless. I'm worried how I'm going to be able to sleep here tonight. I don't know where I'm going to get my next meal. The potential of getting colon cancer 5 years down the line and what to do to prevent that is the least of my worries at this point. And that interaction with this person stays with me every day. And year after year, research study after research study, more evidence showing up every year shows the clear interconnectedness between housing and health. And I don't think we can expect anyone to be able to live healthy life if they don't have a stable roof over their head. And that's really why, as an organization, Kaiser Permanente is committing lots of resources to be able to support and expand affordable housing in our communities and make sure that our members or people living in our communities have a good path to be able to have stable housing. So I'm looking forward to the conversation today with Susie, with Sam, and with you, Debbie, to talk about the interconnectedness between not just housing and health, but really housing and education and housing and corporate. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. Well, it's an incredible story. I think we can, all imagine why you carry that with you. And sometimes, we're so focused on our mission that we can often just miss the boat on what is, right in front of us. So thank you for sharing that. Sam Allen, we would love to hear from you, your perspective.
Yeah, thanks again for having me this morning. This is great. For me, it comes down to two things. First and foremost, I am a veteran, and many veterans are not available to afford housing in California. They move to this amazing state when they're young. They fall in love with it. They get married. They have children. They sacrifice a lot, and you don't join the military to make money. They get out of the military and they want to stay in California, and many of them just can't afford a home. And that's just really unfortunate. And so that's the first thing for me. The second, I've spent 20 years here in the Bay Area in the technology space. And, when I first started, I couldn't afford to own a home. I rented an apartment. But I remember thinking back to all my friends who lived back in the Midwest where I'm from, and they all owned their own homes already. And what's more interesting more recently is with COVID, I have probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 people in my organization that are under the age of 30. And almost all of them have left the Bay Area on a temporary basis to move back home with parents, move back to where they're from, because they're just not in a space that's conducive to working from home, because they live with 4 or 5 roommates. And if you're all working all the time, having 4 or 5 roommates might be okay. But if suddenly you're all thrust together and you're all in the same space, it's just impossible. And so these are well-paid people that work in the technology space, and even they can't afford, to either have less roommates or even afford a home on their own. And so, it's an unfortunate situation we're in across the board, from homelessness all the way up to well-paid professionals that can't afford their own homes or even their own apartments today. And it's just got to change. And we can't just simply look at the macroeconomics and say, well, it's just the way it is. We've got to drive more change to get roofs over more people's heads.
Thank you, Sam. We all appreciate hearing that. I mean, that's such a direct perspective on why housing is so important to you. And I want to thank you for your service. As you know, Habitat does work with veterans as well. And one of our Habitat leaders, Andrew Colleen in Solano, Napa, they have done quite a few programs. And, to quote him, one of the things he says is, veteran and homelessness are two things that should never be said in the same sentence. There's just something clearly wrong there. And certainly what you're sharing in terms of housing and the workforce and still not being able to afford is so powerful. Thank you. Dr. Perez-Guerra, we would love to hear your perspective.
Yes, thank you, Debbie. For education, it's a very vast platform when we're talking about education and housing. COVID-19 has heightened the need for families to have stable resources, primarily stable housing. And we see now, as my colleagues were mentioning, the need for space for students to learn. Often in education, we're looking at this whole concept and focusing on blooms, right? What do students need to learn? But the focus now, given COVID and the reality of housing, has gone down to look at Maslow's. What are those basic needs? And housing is a basic need. Shelter is a basic need. In Orange County, when housing is so expensive and the median wage is so vast, we see these inequities that we're discussing, primarily heightened by COVID, but the reality for many of our students. And we have seen how housing, more so than ever, has been imperative in the way in which they succeed, in the way in which they're able to navigate the current situation. So right now, more than ever, education and housing are hand in hand. As an educational institution, one of the shifts that we've had to do was ensuring that students have basic needs and basic resources, primarily addressing the inequities or instabilities in housing, food, and basic resources.
Thank you, Susie. We all have had so much respect for educators, and there's been so much on the teachers' plates, schools, administrators, and now there's even more, and it's so valuable to hear what you're seeing and sharing. We'd like to talk a little bit about the cross-sector influence and participation. It really takes all of us to try to address this, and it's critical if California is truly going to address housing affordability. To quote you, Dr. Shakir, I believe you said, and Habitat absolutely agrees with you, that it's nearly impossible for a person to achieve and maintain good health if they don't have a stable roof over their head. What would you say is the most significant impact that the housing shortage has had on health and well-being?
Thank you, Debbie. Obviously, the connection between housing and health is so clear, and we've seen that year after year. We've learned about that from research studies. We've learned about that from the evidence, from publications, and it's just common sense. I mean, what we know, on average, a person who's homeless lives about 27 years less than someone who's housed. Think about that for a moment. 27 years less. And the reason is you're on the street compared to someone who has a stable roof over their head. We also know that a homeless person, once they're admitted to the hospital, chances are they're going to stay 2 to 3 days longer in the hospital. We also know that when you discharge someone from the hospital, if you're homeless, you have a 50% chance to be readmitted to the hospital. And we also know when you look at total cost of care, if you're homeless, your total cost of health care is about 3 to 4 times higher than when you're not homeless. So this connection is so clear, and we have, as a health system, we have to have other health systems step up and try to figure out what role can we play to really be able to make a difference. So a few years ago, Kaiser Permanente joined forces together with Dignity Health, now Common Spirit, and Trinity Health, based out of Michigan. And we've created the Healthcare Anchor Network, and that's a coalition of about 47 of the largest health systems in the country. And we said together, what role can we play as anchor institutions in our communities on all different elements that impacts health? And housing is one of these key strategies that we needed to focus on. And we've seen across the system, Debbie, across the country, healthcare system after the others stepping up and saying, we have to be paying attention to our patients' housing status. We have to be paying attention to the affordability of housing in our communities. And part of the efforts that we've launched back in 2018 at KP, we've dedicated $200 million of impact investment to support and expand affordable housing in our communities. And over the last year or so, year and a half or so, we were able, as part of these investments, to preserve or add about 3,100 affordable housing units in our communities. And we truly believe this is a key step that others could be able to follow suit, do the same type of work. And keep in mind, those $200 million were not given in grants. Those are what we call impact investments. So we've worked with our Treasury Department and we said, out of the money that we invest in the market, can we take out a portion of these dollars and instead of invest it in the market, let's invest it in projects that not only give us financial return on investment, but could give us social return on investment. And no better investment, honestly, is than the investment in affordable housing. So that type of effort, any corporation can do, any business can do, whether you're not for profit or for profit, that would still allow you to bring in some financial return, but most importantly, bring you social return. And in the affordable housing space, just add more affordable housing units in your community.
Thank you. And we're so appreciative. We love how Kaiser Permanente has really been a champion around this. You know, all of us housers, we can keep screaming at the top of our lungs. And as other sectors and industries start to recognize and work together and, you know, really be trailblazers and invest. And it's so powerful that you have the accountability and the impact in there. We know how important that is, and we can recognize the results. I'd like to invite Dr. Perez-Guerra and then also Sam Mallon to go ahead and comment if you'd like, either related to your industry or on anything that you heard Dr. Shakir say. Let's start with Susie.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shakir. I really appreciate everything you're saying. And I have to say that as an educational institution, we welcome those partnerships, because part of the transitions that we've had to do is work with nonprofits and for-profit organizations to create that direct linkage between families who are in need and the resources that are available. So the more that corporate organizations have these opportunities to engage with educational institutions and make that direct connection, I think we'll continue to enforce that social improvement. One of the things that I want to say that as a district we're exploring, and particularly with Habitat, I know we've been in the initial conversations, is how to turn some of our, because of declining enrollment and because of the impact that the cost of living in California has had on our population, we're having conversations about turning schools into living houses for either foster youth, because the number is so large in our community, or for teachers starting out, or classified staff, which is our entry-level positions. And I think it's very important as we move forward to have conversations with organizations such as Kaiser to see how else we can connect to make sure that the resources are being connected to the people who need them the most.
Thank you.
Yeah, from my perspective, go ahead.
No, I was just going to invite you to comment, Sam.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So thanks for that. The wonderful world of virtual meetings. For first and foremost, my wife's a second grade public school teacher. So I just, I got to give a shout out to our educators. What they're dealing with right now is amazing. So thank you for the work that you're doing. From a for-profit space and in the business world, it really comes down to, you really want a focused workforce. And if you have people in your workforce that are struggling with putting a roof over their head, and by the way, the doctor's comment about, I think it was 50% higher probability of entering back into the hospital system for homelessness is just sobering, to say the least. So, but if you have people in your workforce who are not focused on work because they can't get a roof over the head, or it may not be them, it might be their brother or sister, a niece, an uncle, or whatever, they're just not productive. And they're really focused on things other than their job. And we also know that for them themselves, anybody that's got a roof over the head is just in a much more stable place, right? Whether they own the home or rent the home, if they have a roof over the head, they're in a better position. And what we can't do in the business world is just look at that and say, "Oh, that's a problem," and then turn around and go back, in our business. We've got to really focus and provide capabilities and resources above and beyond just donating money. And that's an important piece of this, of course. We've got to find other ways to be part of the solution, because it's just too critical, especially in California. It's very acute. But this is a nationwide and even a global problem, which is why Habitat's such a great partner, because they have that global footprint. But the business world needs to tuck in here and be part of the solution.
Thank you. We could not agree more, and that's why that's what we love our partnerships with the private sector. I'd like to turn a little bit more toward education. You briefly mentioned this a little bit, Dr. Perez-Guerra. You know better than we do how stable housing really has an impact on children, or the lack of has an impact on children. Certainly, if families are chasing affordable rent, then there's a lot of disruption, and it's difficult to achieve academically. Could you comment a little bit more on the recent trends and the challenges and how that is impacting what you see in your students and families?
Of course. Thank you, Debbie. One of the things that Orange County has encountered is this wide economic range, right? For Santa Ana, it's not as monolithic as many people like to think. However, we have experienced throughout the last 5 years great mobility outside of Orange County. And as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about a Maslowian approach, in order for our students and our families to reach that level of self-efficacy in a way in which they can really thrive, they need to make sure that those basic securities are met. COVID right now has brought that to the forefront more than ever. As Sam was saying, teachers are teaching either at home, and that's one of the things that we had not considered. We'd made assumptions and accommodations for our students and our families, but we did not go out and think of our teachers. The expectation or the assumption was that they all had their own home, their own space to teach. And now we're noticing, and we've seen different posts throughout of different people conducting meetings, right? You have teachers who are living with multi-generational families who now have to identify a space that's going to be quiet for 5 to 6 hours in which they can focus and conduct instruction. Some of them don't have space. The same thing with students, you know, if you have 5, 6 students, as a doctor was mentioning earlier, and they're all engaging in different classroom activities, it's merely impossible, let alone in a 1-bedroom apartment that's housing 15 people. So now more than ever, we know that a proper shelter supports educational advancement. But not only that, if children and families don't have to be worried about moving around, they can develop stable relationships that then allow them to really engage in adequate learning, building those relationships that have lifelong impact, not only on their academic development, but also on their social and emotional development, which go hand in hand.
Yeah, you know, Debbie, if I can add, I mean, Susie's comments are so right on, and you know, we know how housing is so critical before the pandemic hits, and now that we're in the midst of a really serious, dangerous pandemic, we're realizing how housing is even more critical. Just 2 quick example to give you that kind of appreciates that importance there. One, you know, we talk about, oh, keep 6 feet apart from each other, do social distancing, wear masks, you know, do all of these things that makes total sense for all of us who are living comfortably in our homes. Think about how would you be able to apply these types of recommendations in a homeless shelter. You know, how can you actually get to a point where you can implement these practices in a homeless shelters that are already overcrowded? So you have additional layer of complexity, and that's not even talking about the complexity for our workers, you know, for our homeless workers who are in these shelters, in soup kitchens, trying to navigate the complexity of staying safe and yet still be able to serve this population. The other example I'd want to give up is I want to share with this group is when you're thinking about diagnosing somebody who ended up being testing positive and they have to isolate and their contacts would have to quarantine. And when you have people doubled up and living with other family members or with friends. And just like Susie mentioned, when you have, and we've seen example after example of 5, 7, 10 people living in 1 or 2 bedroom apartments, it's almost impossible to be able to isolate or quarantine in those types of settings in a safe way that would prevent the transmission of the virus to other people in your household. So I think what we're seeing with the pandemic is it's putting the impact of lack of housing, the impact of homelessness on health even more into perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that's why it's imperative that we're having these conversations and focusing on more solutions. We want to talk a little bit more about the workforce. According to Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies, 41.6, almost 42% of California households are housing burden, meaning that they're paying over 30% of their income toward housing. This is whether it's rental or ownership. And this is true at every income level, not just low income. So what this tells us, this demonstrates that we're not just talking about wages, but it's about supply. It's about lack of availability. There's just not enough entry-level housing for young professionals or families who are even earning 100 or 120% of the area median income. Sam, you alluded to this in terms of your workforce, making pretty good wages and not being able to afford. Can you speak a little bit to your sector and maybe Salesforce specifically about how you're coping with that, with retention, and maybe some advice that you have for other business leaders on how we can tackle this?
Yeah, so I did touch this a little bit. We're in the heart of Silicon Valley, and there's been a war, we call a war for talent here for decades. And at the end of the day, we compete against all the other technology companies that are surrounding us. And we're an amazing company. I'm not just saying that because I carry the badge, but it is truly an amazing company. And we have to fight hard for the employees that we have because this is a knowledge-based business. This is not about labor or anything like that. And so it's about brain power. And in a world where housing is so hard to get and expensive, even for those making great wages, it makes the war for talent even more difficult because you have to basically overpay an employee to get them to come to your company. And those are resources that can be better spent in research and development. They can be better spent in improving the community in which you live. There's lots of other things you can do with that money. And then, COVID has highlighted or amplified this challenge and this problem. And as I said, we now have a pretty decent size of the workforce, generally people under the age of 30, 32, 35, who are leaving the Bay Area. And these are people that actually do make great money. And that's a drain that we don't want as an ecosystem. We don't want those people leaving. We want them to be invested in their community. We want them to stay. Those are future leaders. Those are people that are going to continue to provide help and go swing a hammer at a habitat site. And seeing them leave is hard. And they go back to Indianapolis or St. Louis or Atlanta, and they're buying 3-bedroom, 2.5 homes, and they were living with 3 other people in an apartment in Nob Hill in San Francisco. And that's just got to change because I do believe that it does trickle all down. And if we're going to start losing people in the middle income, that's just going to exacerbate the problem over time. So what are we doing about it? We, first and foremost, we are trying to provide as many, services as we can to our employees. We're giving them the freedom of movement that they need to, take care of loved ones or take care of themselves. We're really trying to constantly tell them and have a drumbeat of communication that says, take the time that you need. If you have an elderly neighbor, like I do, I have a woman who's next door to me who's 82, and that's really scary in the time of COVID. And so we're trying to help her out, right? Because she doesn't have family here. I need time to do that. And so we have to give our employees the time to do that. The best advice I can give other people out there, whether you're in for-profit space or not, is to really just have as much empathy as you can right now. And then provide as much as you can the technology capability. I think it's worth it to a company to take a financial hit to make sure that their employees have the assets they need. You've heard on this panel several times how challenging it is for students to be in a learning environment. It's the same with parents, especially if you have two parents that work and they're both trying to work and do Zoom calls and all that. So if you want a more productive, more healthy workforce, then invest in them in this time and give them the help them find resources they need to take care of kids or elderly parents or whatever. It's just really worth it to a company to invest in its workforce right now.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful, and I know it's certainly a challenge just depending on the size of the business. But empathy and in investing in our employees makes so much sense. I want to flip a little bit to part of the conversation that we've been hearing. You've all highlighted in your comments some of the racial inequities and social justice and lack of economic justice that we have. Recognizing that there is not one solution or one size fits all. Do you have an idea, something maybe really bold that almost seems impossible, or maybe something that might be practical, but California has failed to implement that you think would really be a good solution in this arena? Sam, I know you serve on the board of directors with San Francisco Habitat, and so I was going to invite you to comment on this first, and then we'll go to Dr. Shukair and then Dr. Perez-Guerra.
Sure. As a technologist, for me, it's technology. From online applications to measuring how we do impact, and of course, fundraising are all ways that Habitat is using Salesforce today and all the important work. And that obviously supports some of the racial inequality that we're seeing, or addresses, the racial inequality. Secondly, at Salesforce, we have this mantra of business as a platform for change, and that certainly rings true in this case. Businesses can provide grants. With Habitat, they can provide pro bono services. They can send teams to help with construction projects. That's actually how I first got introduced to Habitat 20 years ago. I went and swung a hammer on a site here in East Palo Alto, and it was an amazing experience. And to see those future homeowners next to you providing the sweat equity is just very empowering. So businesses can also empower their ecosystem of partners and customers to do all these things as well. I think businesses also understand, as I mentioned before, that better housing means a more productive workforce. So in some ways, it's self-serving. Another comment here, there's, as many of you probably know, there's a strong push with what's called a double bottom line, or some calling it triple bottom line. And that means it's just more about your profitability as an enterprise. Like, what are you doing to improve the world around you? And over this past summer, our CEO, Mark Benioff, has been pushing his message of stakeholder capitalism, because frankly, we're just honestly tired of waiting for government to solve the problem. And they're burdened with a lot of other problems besides this. And we've got to, like I said earlier, tuck in and be part of the solution. And at the center of the corporate social responsibility movement lies how our company not only cares for its workforce through things like employee engagement, which I spoke about, volunteerism, and socially responsible practices like going to carbon neutral, but also how they care for the communities in which they live and work. It's important to me as a resident in Redwood City, California, that the people around me also have opportunity in housing and a roof over their head. It just makes my community better. So things like matching funds, volunteerism, and engaging in nonprofits and schools are all really, really critical. I'm beating the drum here, but Salesforce, for instance, donates over $1 billion of donated product globally every single year. We've issued over $300 million in grants, a lot of that to educational institutions. And Habitat projects remain one of the top volunteer activities for our employee base. Our employees love to go out and get their hands dirty at Habitat sites. So tracing this back to technology, we learn together, we pave a path forward with R&D, and we try things that can be adapted and scaled for use with organizations like Habitat. I think it's critical that the technology sector partner really tightly with the nonprofit space. At Salesforce, we've done this successfully. We've adapted our technologies and to fit the needs of not only nonprofits, but also educational institutions across the world, but specifically here in the US. So at the end of this, I think technology is a key piece of this puzzle. I think there are lots of bold actions out there that people are talking about. To be very blunt and honest with you, though, I think just coming back to some simple blocking and tackling, businesses have to get more involved. Yes, they have to donate money, but they need to provide services, in terms like pro bono help as much as they can.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank
we'd
you.
love to hear from you.
Debbie, so thank you,
Go ahead,
Sam.
Dr. Shakir.
Okay, great. I wanted to echo what Sam has mentioned. I can't agree more. And I think for me, maybe if I go like a few thousand feet also higher there, I think when when we go upstream to address the root causes of poor health, we invariably encounter problems fueled by systemic racism and inequality. The reality is income inequality, racism and other forms of discrimination, societal neglect, and disinvestment, these really are the underlying factors that create these conditions that lead to poor health, including this inequality and inequity that we're seeing in housing. So for me, a key bold way for everybody to step up and think more boldly about these issues is to take on head on to address systemic racism and inequality in our communities. In companies, we're seeing companies after companies, we're seeing organizations, people step up across the country and saying these things are just not okay. And we need to address these issues. We need to talk about them. We need to come to the space with a lot of humility, a lot of curiosity, to be able to partner with the right people to address these issues just right on, and not just kind of tackle with things that are around these issues and not name them. I also think it's really important to lift up our voices, be close to what's happening on the policy side in your community, whether you're at a local level, at a state level, or a federal level. There are lots of things that we can leverage our voices. Get to know your elected officials, and most importantly, particularly in this season, I really encourage us all to make sure that we're voting, because at the end of the day, it's that voice that matters, and it's really important that we all do that.
I could not have said that better. Yes, please vote. But I'm going to go back and thank you both gentlemen, because I love the word ecosystem, and I think that is at the root of addressing any social injustice, inequities. If we understand that we are part of this greater ecosystem, and that our organizations, be it health, corporate, nonprofit, for-profit, are not silos or standalones, that we depend on one another. And by raising others, and we raise the entirety of our community, our collective community, I think that's how we continue growing. So engaging in these collective partnerships with everyone in your community, your governmental agencies, your elected officials, your educational institutions, your workforce, so that we all have the same understanding of what the needs, what the resources, what the gifts and talents are, so that we can continue moving the voice forward. Inequities are brought forth because we disassociate ourselves with the needs of other people. Once we truly understand the human aspect, be it a homeless issue, be it a socioeconomic disadvantage, be it a racial issues, once we humanize each other, I think we're able to engage in these true ecosystem approach. And I love that, Sam, of moving forward. And I think that's exactly what Habitat does. You go into it, you engage everyone, and you let us understand and experience what it means to give of our talents, whatever they may be.
Thank you. You've given us so much to think about, and I want to sincerely thank each one of you, Dr. Shakir, Sam Allen, Dr. Perez Guerra. You've been so generous with your time and your expertise with all of us today, and we're so grateful. Next, we really kind of have our call to action. And so I'd like to summarize with everyone. We heard from Toni Atkins, Senator Toni Atkins. She really challenged us all to spread the word, and to spread the word that access to home affordability is about all of us. The shortage is a result of decades of underdevelopment. So all of us, all of you being partners and just spreading that word that this is about all of us. We heard it from our panelists as well. The other thing is to stop misinformation. Let's challenge the not in my backyard resistance. There's so many complexities to housing, and if we are going to make sure that everybody has access to it, then we need to challenge some of these things. Adding to this, a couple of pretty easy calls to action would include reaching out to your employees at every level. Do you know what their housing challenges are? Sometimes that's not something that we want to talk about or that people feel comfortable with. So, really kind of understanding how many of your employees might be cost burdened on housing. Do you have any idea at every level? Another opportunity is with our local candidates. As we know, an election is coming up. So for local candidates, where is housing in terms of their priority? And at the state level as well, as we're voting for the Senate and Assembly members and representatives, where is housing on their agenda? The other thing is we love staying in touch with all of you. So I want to invite you to continue to stay connected with your local Habitat affiliates. And if you haven't been in touch, if you want to reach out after this and continue the discussion and the dialogue, then that's what this is all about, is being able to keep the conversation going, recognizing that we're all in this together and we're partners. And I'd like to just take a minute to recognize our summit committee. There's a whole group of folks that help make this happen behind the scenes. Thank you so much to Extraordinary Summit Committee. Habitat California, our statewide Habitat affiliates, and I sincerely want to thank you for making time to join us today. Please stick around to hear firsthand from another homeowner and a couple of students, plus one of our local business partners. It's short, I promise, but you don't want to miss this. If you happen to miss the pre-show, please be sure to catch it, because you may actually see yourself or some of your team members from your organization volunteering on our job sites. Together, we are going to keep working hard to make sure that housing is affordable for all Californians. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please don't go away, and we look forward to connecting with you more soon. Thank you.
My name is Kadu Mulvihill. I am a single mom of 4 boys, Ryan, Trenton, Mason, and Kendall. I needed to find a home for my boys and myself after my parents have both passed away. We used to live with them and took care of them until their passing. We had gone through trying to find accessible housing. My youngest son, Kendall, uses a wheelchair. He has cerebral palsy. Trying to find a home or an apartment is next to impossible. Everything's got stairs to enter or some type of path that's, can't get a power wheelchair through. It really felt crushing, definitely tested my faith. My girlfriend at UCLA, where I work, she told me I should look into Habitat. I learned that they were building on the west side here in Culver City. My church ended up getting involved and sponsoring a house. So I was fundraising for the project before it was even open for application. I grew up in Culver City. My parents' home was a mile away from here. And I know the street. So while the application process was going through, late at night, I would come and pray over the property, over the project, that was God's will, that we would be here. My favorite part of going through this process was coming out and actually being able to throw walls up and see physical things happening to make it happen was just really great. The houses have ramped entrances to the front, and they're an open concept. We have an extra bedroom downstairs, and the bathroom, it's tiled, it has a sloped floor, it's curbless, no tub. Kendall's just loving the independence that it's helping, him gain.
I am 7 classes away from getting my AA. Right now, I'm working on a paper for my child development class. It's about my philosophy and who I want to be as a teacher.
We are today going to celebrate with a grand caravan coming down the street, waving and celebrating. Yet we wanted to still have the opportunity to bless these 4 homes. You guys have moved in at a really unprecedented time in our nation's history, but we are so happy we were able to continue to move forward and move you into your homes during this season. God bless this home.
It's already this wonderful community. It is just blessed with the most incredible people. Our neighbors have homes that Kendall can roll into. Kendall loves just going up and down the block and talking with everybody. It's a real blessing. I have the same hopes and dreams for Kendall that I do for all my boys. I want them to be good humans. I want them just to be kind and to help people when they can. And I'm really blessed because they are all doing that. Every back step that we've taken, every forward step has all been part of that process, part of that journey for us. To wait to actually get into the house, but to know that every single day and every single step was done with somebody thinking about getting us in here. It's been a really wonderful journey.
Just to, see everyone a lot happier. When you see your parents happy, when you see your siblings happy, you can concentrate more on the things that you have to do. So for me, it definitely impacted how I performed in school.
Oh my God, I think it's one of the greatest benefits that a family can have, to have an affordable way of living, extra money for education.
Huge opportunity to support them to doing better in their future.
Our oldest son is graduated from an Ivy League school. After our home, I think it was the second dream for us that came true.
I graduated this past June with a degree in biology from Dartmouth College, and I'm working at a healthcare consultancy. For, many families, that go through the Habitat for Humanity program, really education, I see it as the only way to really improve their situation, and that's sort of, what happened to me.
Hi, my name is Daniela Del Rio. I live in San Diego, and I'm currently in the 10th grade. I love our future home because as a student, a good learning space is very important, and my new home will provide a good learning space. My current room is quite small, so unfortunately I'm not able to do my schoolwork in my room. So I do my schoolwork in my living room or at my dining table. My living room and dining table are right next to a window which leads to my street, so it makes it really loud and hard for me to focus. At my new home, I will be able to focus more as there will be less noise, and I will have a larger room, so I will be able to do my work in my new room. I will now be able to go about my schoolwork more efficiently, be able to focus more, and have less distractions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Charles Antis, CEO of Antis Roofing and Waterproofing here in Irvine, California. And 31 years ago, when I was ready to do a repair and make some money in my young business, I was instead hit with the smell of mildew when I opened the door of this house with a mother's expression that was not good. And as I started to turn away, I felt a tug at my finger where this little beautiful blonde girl pulled me into her house and into her room. I knew it was her room because she pointed to this My Little Pony poster on the wall, but at that exact moment, my eyes were drawn to the floor and I saw 4 moldy mattresses. And I froze. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have the money. But when the mom walked back in that room, something happened to me. I said, I'm gonna take care of your roof. And I couldn't grab the words back. And I went up. In my young company, we kept that roof dry. And it made all the difference. So when Habitat called me about 11 years ago, Sharon Ellis, and she said, Charles, will you donate a roof? I said, sure. Because we exist to keep families safe and dry. And that has made all the difference. We've donated every roof since because there's something powerful when you align with people in a way that says our brains believe that everyone deserves a decent place to live. When you have that, and when I have that, And when they have that, we trust each other. Not our smart cognitive brains, but our reptilian brains, the one that drives us. Today, we're relevant in the community because we keep families safe and dry. And the metaphor by which we show that is through Habitat for Humanity. And because of that, Antis is trusted in the community. Thank you for being partners with Habitat for Humanity, and thank you for thinking like me, that everyone deserves a decent place to live.